Hey guys, Callum from the AO Group coming to you again with another video. We recently had a customer ask us how to create their own filing cabinets so they could self-manage their DocuWare system. This prompted us to create this video series whereby we'll create filing cabinets, we will attach select lists, and we will create search store dialogues. Let's jump in. Step 1 is to click on your name at the top right hand corner here. From here we go to Configurations and then Filing Cabinets. You'll see here in this system I already have 3 filing cabinets set up. To create a new filing cabinet is incredibly simple. I click New File Cabinet. I give my filing cabinet a name. This can be whatever you want it to be. Obviously, try and keep your filing cabinets as generic and kind of as large as possible. This will allow you to store more than one document to it, more than one document type, and it will also stop you from being pigeonholed and ending up with 200, 300 different filing cabinets and making things really hard to find. So for this demo, let's look at creating a HR filing cabinet. So first of all, we give it the name HR. We pick the color. The color really doesn't matter in DocuWare. It's just the color of the tab that the file cabinet has in DocuWare, so you can choose whatever you want. Full text search, I would always recommend leaving on by default. It means that you can do a global Google search on those documents. You can find those documents using any word that's on the document, not just the index information you give the document itself. From here we click Next, and this presents us with the database fields. I really don't like setting up the filing cabinet from here, so my recommendation is to remove all of the fields and just leave a field there, which is the first field or the most predominant field that you're going to need within the filing cabinet. As we're creating a HR related cabinet, this field is likely going to be something like employee first name, or employee name, or employee number, whatever is that headline field that filing cabinet is going to need. From here we click Next. Permissions, again, I prefer to do this after the creation of the filing cabinet, so I would recommend leaving these as default. Now we click Finish. DocuWare is now going to create our filing cabinet for us, and we get a pop-up in the top right hand corner telling us that our filing cabinet is now ready to use. If I now go back to my DocuWare system, refresh, what we will now see is that in the top searches, I now have a HR cabinet with a default search dialog and the employee first name field. Under my document trays, I have a default store dialog now for HR, and again with just the employee first name. So phase 1 of my filing cabinet creation is now complete. So now if I go back to my configurations page, I can now click the pencil to edit my filing cabinet, and I can start now to customize the filing cabinet with the values I need. So, being a HR cabinet, if we go to our database fields, we're likely going to need some additional fields as well as the employee first name. What are those fields? Well, they're likely to be employee surname, I don't know, employee date of birth, maybe. Under the field type here, I can now choose date. I could also need, I don't know, employee email address. And again, these are completely customizable depending on what you need the fields to do for you. There's no limit really in terms of the filing cabinet fields. I mean, there is a hard limit, but you're going to be hard pressed to hit that. And there are tons of different field types that you can create here. So in this example here, we've got a text and a date field. The other field types that we have available to us are numeric. Now these are straight number fields. They are always a whole number without any decimal places. We have a memo field, which is effectively a large unlimited free type field where you can add notes or comments or anything like that. So in here you could have employee notes, for example, under here. We could have now an employee register that we start to build, and we add a ton of notes on this employee as well. Additional field types that we have within DocuWare are also the keyword field. Now a keyword field is effectively allowing multiple entries under this employee. So an example of a keyword field in the HR environment could be permission level. And what we could have here is the employee could have access to level 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1 within the business. In the keyword field, we would add all of those values, and this would then grant the user permissions based on all of those permissions, all of those levels, kind of throughout the build of the system later down the line. The other option we have here is decimal. Now this is the same as the numeric, but it does allow decimal places, and if we choose that, we can customize how many decimal places we want to allow. The final option we have, or the final two options, one is date time. It's the same as date, but we have a time that we can calculate in there. This is really handy if you want to use the HR cabinet for something like automating the creation of an interview time. So if you wanted to set up a business process whereby we set up an interview within DocuWare automatically, and we want to email the participant to tell them that your interview is going to be at 1 PM on this day, we'd use the date time field to be able to do that within DocuWare. The final option we have here in the field types is a table field. Now, a table field is predominantly used in the accounts side of DocuWare, whereby we're going to have table items on an invoice itself. But we could have this in a HR environment when we're doing something like a timesheet. So we could have, I don't know, the Monday as one of the fields. The next field would be time start. The next field would be time finish, and then total hours. The next field down would be Monday, time start at total hours, and that could be for the afternoon. Then we could have Tuesday, and so on and so on. And we could then get staff filling in expense claim forms or overtime forms or anything like that in the HR environment where we would need to capture multiple lines of information against one record. As it is for my cabinet here, I'm not going to have that in there at the moment. So we have now the basis of our filing cabinet. We have the employee first name, their surname, their date of birth, the email address, the notes, and the permissions level. Now, what we may also want here is the ability to find the document later on and to be able to store documents under an express type of document. For something like this, what I usually then do within here would be also to have a category. And now the category is the headline, kind of the top line folder in a HR folder structure. So you would go in and you would double click in there, you'd have the employee name, then you'd have disciplinary. You'd have the employee name, family friendly, the employee name, bonuses, the employee name, salary. The category is that kind of that top line folder whereby you would have the kind of predominant segregation of those documents there. After the category, what we normally have is something like a subcategory or a document type or something like that. Actually, document type is probably the better option here. And that would be, again, where we said category. So we would have category of salary, document type, payslip. Category of disciplinary, document type, warning letter, and so on and so on. And we get the idea. The reason we do this is that then makes things much easier, one, easier to find, and two, easier to store later down the line in DocuWare. So we're not having to go and find things in huge giant lists. We're kind of segregating them into smaller silos of data. What we may also want here is a document description. Now this is helping us to identify the exact document we're looking for. So we could have 200 payslips under an employee, and we could be looking for this certain payslip with a certain description and a certain date, for example. The other thing we usually have at this time is a document date. And again, that would be a date field. What I tend to do for a description field is I tick this document name field here. Now what that does is it automatically takes the name of the file that you're storing and will place it in there. We can change it later as we're storing, but it tends to just make things a little quicker and a little bit easier when we're storing down the line. Now we're happy with all our fields. Click Save. We'll get a pop-up telling us that our fields have been saved successfully, and we'll be able to now use our fields later down the line in the DocuWare setup. Okay, so now we have our fields. The next thing to do is choose how or set up how a human or a user is going to interact with those fields. To do that, we go to the Dialogues tab. Now, DocuWare splits their dialogues into search, store, results, and lists and folders. I'm not going to cover lists and folders just now. We're just going to look at the search, store, and results list. So the first thing when we're looking at getting a document into the system is we need to look at how we store. By default, DocuWare will create the default store dialog, and that will contain all of the fields in all of their default settings, as I say, by default, without me needing to change anything. What is good practice, or what we tend to do when we're looking at creating a DocuWare filing cabinet, is to leave that default store dialog as it is. Leave it there for admin or for API access or for anything like that. That can just stay there. We never show that to users. It's always just there under the accounts or the admin user. So nobody really ever looks at that or uses that in the background of the system. What we tend to do is create our own store dialog, give it a name, so save to HR. And now what we can do is we can change the order of these fields as they would display to a user when they're storing. So the order we might want, for example, is category, document type first and second. They're the really important things. We need to know who they are. Then we want employee first name and surname. Actually, we don't want to show employee date of birth because we're not going to know that when we store. It's not that important at storage, but we need it in the background. We're not going to show the employee email address. Again, don't need that at point of store. It's not that important at that point in time. We might want to leave employee notes. Probably not, however, so we'll look at moving those as well. Permission level, we're going to get that automatically later down the line. So once again, we'll look at removing that from the store. Now we're left with category, document type, employee first name, employee surname, document description, and the document date. Now we moved category and document type to the top because actually when we were looking at it, we thought, oh, they might be the most important things. But then when we look at or we consider the storing flow, we're asking the user to store here now based on document information, user information, document information again. We may be happy with this, or we may look at it and go, actually, do you know what? That's not an ideal flow. What we want for the user is to store the user information and then the document information, or the document information and then the user information. So we need to take these things into consideration when we're building these filing cabinets. As it is, I'm going to go with document information and then user. So I'm also going to move up document description and document date to the top of my fields. What I also want to do is I want to set all of the fields that are mandatory at storage at this point in time. So I need the user to fill in the employee first name. I need the user to fill in the employee surname. I need the user to fill in the category, the document type, and the document date. The document description is optional, so I'm going to leave that as non-required, not mandatory. It's an optional thing when we look at saving to a HR cabinet. Further down here, we have the ability to set up intelligent indexing. I've covered that in another video, so I'm not going to go into intelligent indexing right now. We also have the ability to set up validation web services whereby we can check the values of information before we store it. Normally this is something that if you need a validation, you would speak to your DocuWare partner about. If you do need something setting up or you want to know a bit more about validations, feel free to reach out. We've got some really cool validations running for some of our customers. We're more than happy to help you out there. If I just tick less options just to remove those again. So now I'm happy with how I'm going to save to my HR cabinet. Click OK. Click Save again. Always get into the habit of clicking Save just to be on the safe side as you run through every single section. It just saves you losing data if you lose internet connection, if the cloud goes down or anything like that. It's a really good habit to get into. Now, we've set up our Save to HR cabinet. We've set up our Save to HR dialog. If I go back to my DocuWare system, if I refresh my screen again, now what you'll see is HR, Save to HR, everything that I ticked with mandatory is now marked with an asterisk. The fields are in the order that I just set them up to be, and everything is now exactly as I just asked it to be within the filing cabinet. If I try and store without filling in one of these mandatory fields, you'll see I get an error and a red box around the field telling me I must fill in the mandatory field. There we have it. Our store dialog is now set up, and we can now look how we set up searching in a filing cabinet. So if we click back to our configurations tab, in the dialogs, we're now going to go to search. Again, we've got the default search dialog. Again, my recommendation is just to leave that be. It's super handy, as I mentioned earlier, for API access. So if anyone's looking at hooking into the filing cabinet through the API, having the default search and the default store there just makes it so much easier. So just leave them as they are. So what we're going to do here is create a new search dialog. Click plus, give it a name, search HR, and just like the store dialog, this is the name that will appear in DocuWare. And now once again, we have the ability to amend the order of the fields that we can search by within DocuWare. The additional fields we have are the system fields that DocuWare also fills in automatically. So anything with the DocuWare logo after it is a system field that DocuWare automatically creates when a document is stored. Full text was the field whereby I said you can do a kind of a Google search on those documents. So if it's a contract, you could search for clause 15b, and it's going to take you to clause 15b on that contract. I always like to look at moving this to the top of the filing cabinet. Just so as a user, if I want to do a quick search just for one thing in there, I can just type it in and it will bring it up and bring it there for me. After that, I can then arrange the order of the filing cabinet as I need. So now as we're searching, whereas we probably store under a document because we're storing a particular document for that employee first of all. When we're searching, we would tend to search for the employee more than a document in particular. So this time, what I'm going to do is leave the employee information at the top. I'm going to remove the date of birth because likelihood is we're not going to search for something by employee date of birth. I'm going to remove the email address. Likelihood is, again, we're not going to search for anything using the employee email address. I'm also going to remove the employee notes. Again, we're likely not to search for that. And I'm also going to remove the permission level because we're likely not going to search for something by permission level as well. What does this leave? Well, actually, it leaves the reverse of the fields that we stored earlier on. So if you look when we were storing, we had category, document type, document description, document date, employee first name and employee surname. When we're searching, we're actually searching for those exact same fields again. The additional field that I like to leave on a search is the stored on field. Now, the reason I like to leave this on for a search is if you can't remember a document, but you remember a rough year when the document came in, you can't remember what was on it, but you're looking for something within a certain, you know it came in January 2022, for example, you can run the search on stored on. You could search within that month alone and find all of the documents stored in that month. It's not mandatory. You can remove it, obviously, but it's something I actually quite like leaving on just to give me the additional flexibility on that search. Scroll down. Again, now I have more options. And the additional option I have here is a result list, and I can choose a result list or create a new result list for this search dialog. Now, a result list is the list of fields that appear after I run a search. So if I go back to my DocuWare system, go to my HR search and hit search, the view that I get after I run the search, this view here, is my result list. I can again choose centrally the order of those fields that as I want them to appear after a search has been run. I could also choose to hide certain fields here if I didn't want certain fields to be shown. So here, I want to create a new result list, give it a name. Doesn't really matter the name here, you don't really see it in DocuWare, so anything is good enough here. And again, I can choose the order or the where I want these fields to be in this list. One of the things I like adding here is the document ID, and I like putting it as the first field that is shown in the results. The reason I do this is the document ID is always the unique document number within DocuWare. There will never ever be two documents with the same document ID in the same filing cabinet. This is really handy when a user's searching. They know the unique number, so if they're communicating with a fellow staff member, they can say, oh yeah, it's document 1234 or whatever. What's also really handy is if there's a need for support on a certain document, you're able to give that unique document reference number to the person offering support, and they can go and identify and find that document instantly without too much hassle. I'm going to again remove the date of birth, email address, and notes from here. Just because I don't want them at this point in time, I'll show you where they're useful later on down the line. The next option we have here is the index dialog. Now this is how the fields will appear if we want to edit the index entries later down the line. I'm going to leave this exactly as it is for now. We're not going to go into that just at this moment in time. I'm going to leave everything as it is now. Click OK. You'll see now automatically I get taken back to my search dialog. The result list here is automatically changed to HR result. Click OK. I now have my Search HR search dialog set up. Under results, I have the HR result dialog set up automatically as well. I can now click save. My changes are saved. If I go back to my DocuWare system, refresh my DocuWare system again, now under searches, I have HR, search HR, and the fields are now in the exact order that we just set them up for. And that is how we create a search dialog in the filing cabinet. The final thing we need to do is now assign the permissions to these searches and stores, and also to be able to view documents within the filing cabinet. So if we go back to our configurations tab, go to permissions, and by default will be set on with basic permissions as shown within the filing cabinet. DocuWare permissions can kind of be as granular as you like them to be. Obviously, the more permissions you put in place, the harder it's going to be to find documents or to search for documents or to give permissions to documents, and the more management that's going to be needed on this filing cabinet. There is no real secret sauce to these permissions, and it always depends on the use case. If you need any assistance here, again, feel free to reach out. We're more than happy to have that discussion and see how or what we can do to assist you in the creation of filing cabinets and the correct permissions. For this demonstration, what I'm going to show you is how we create two different sets of permissions. One of the permissions is for any user to be able to see a document that matches their email address. And the other is for the HR team to be able to store and search for every single document within the system. The first one that I'm going to set up is the users be able to see documents where their own email address is mentioned. So to do that, it's incredibly simple. Click the toggle here for advanced permissions, and you'll see I get another view showing me all the different permissions that are available. From here, I'm going to click plus to create a new permission, and I now have two options. One is a custom profile and the other is an index value profile. Because I want to set the permission where a user can see the document based on their email address being mentioned in the document, it is therefore going to be an index value profile that I want to set up for these users. Here we can give it a name. I'm going to call it see own documents. The name again doesn't really matter. It just makes it easier for other administrators that are coming into the system to see what's been set up and to understand their way around it. Now within the query definition, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a rule here. So I'm going to click plus to create a new rule. I'm going to go to the fields. I'm going to say employee email address. I'm going to say contains, or I could use is equal. Both are valid options here. For this one, I'm going to use contains. And in my drop-down list, you'll see I have 3 default options that I can choose. I'm going to choose the email of the user from my default options. Now this means that any user that logs in, if their email address is mentioned in this employee email address field at all, they will be able to see the document they're looking for. Further down, I need to give them permissions. So I want them to be able to search for the document and I want them to be able to display the document. I don't want them to be able to edit anything. They definitely can't delete. They definitely can't export. I don't want them being able to print or email a document out the system. I don't want them being able to append. I don't want them to be able to check out. I just want them to be able to look at the document. So these 2 permissions should be enough. Under the overlays, now these are the annotations that you can add to documents. I have another video on annotations. I don't want users for these permissions to be able to do anything with the annotations at all. So I'm going to leave these completely blank. These users can just search and just see the documents. Go to the index fields. I'm going to set them to be able to read and search only. I don't want them to be able to write or modify to any of the index fields. Now I'm happy with these permissions. Click OK. You'll see now a new permission has been set up for users to be able to see their own documents. The next permissions I wanted to set up was the ability for the HR team to be able to search and store and edit all of the documents in the filing cabinet. Now I could switch this off and just create a new profile here called HR team and give them read and edit permissions. I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to go back to the advanced, click the plus and give them a custom profile here. Give the name HR team. I want them to be able to store, check. I want them to be able to search, display documents. I want them to be able to edit the index data. So if they store it under the wrong document type or with the wrong description, I want them to be able to go back in and edit that information. I definitely don't want them to be able to delete, so I'm going to leave that unticked. I do not want them to be able to edit the original document. Anything that's stored to this cabinet must stay in the way it was originally. Yes, they can append, they can attach existing documents or new documents to an existing document in the system. And I want them to be able to view the history of that document as well. Under the overlays, I want them to be able to add annotations. So I want them to be able to add new annotations, but I do not want them to be able to delete any annotations that have been added by any other member of staff. So I'm not going to give them delete annotations permissions here. Under the index fields now, I need these users to be able to write to these fields, and I need these users to be able to modify these fields. I also need them to be able to allow new entries. So if a field is blank, I need them to be able to store a new value into that field if it's blank. At the moment, and for completeness, I'm going to give that to all fields. What we may want to do is make that a little bit more segregated further down the line. For example, they won't be able to modify permission levels on a document. If a level 4 says, "Oh, can I see that?" If a HR team member has the ability to modify a permissions level, I don't want them going in and making that change themselves. It has to go through the proper channels for that to happen. But for now, to keep it nice and simple, I'm going to leave everything as it is like this. Click OK. Click Save. And we have our permission levels now set up in the system. The next thing we need to do is just assign users to, or roles, or direct permissions to these permissions and dialogues that we have just created. To do this, we go back, make sure everything is saved. We click these 9 squares at the top left-hand corner, go to User Management, and here we will see a big list of all of the users that we have in the system. Under Roles, by default we have these 2 roles. We may have additional roles within the system as well. One of the roles here, for example, that I'm going to need is HR Team. So I'm going to create a role called HR Team. Under File Cabinet Profiles, you'll see now I can assign them permissions to the HR Team permission set that I just created in the system. Under Dialogues now, under the HR, I want them to be able to search HR, I want them to be able to save to HR, and I want them to have the HR result list, otherwise when they search they're not going to be able to find anything. It's really important if you want a user to be able to store, search, and see the results that you tick a search dialog, a store dialog, and a result dialog in their permissions. If you don't give them all free, they will not be able to find the documents, or see the documents, or store the documents. So always remember to give all free permissions. We can now assign users or groups to this permission. As it is, there's only one user in my system, so if I ticked my name here and saved, I would now have permissions as a HR team member within the system. The final option I wanted to do was that first permissions I set, which was the ability for all users to see just their own documents in the system. So now, under default organizational role, because it's for everybody, and now this is really key to remember, if you use the default organizational role, it is always for everyone. You cannot segregate this later. You'd have to remove and recreate the permissions manually again. So if you want or may need at any point in time some sort of not every single user, then don't use the default organizational rules. Create a new role for that. As it is in my system, this is a really, really basic demonstration system. So I'm going to come into here. Under File Cabinet Profiles, I'm now going to tick See Own Documents. I want these users to be able to see their own documents in the system. Under Dialogues, I don't need these users to save. They're not saving anything to this cabinet, so I don't want the store dialog set up. I do want them to be able to search, and I do want them to be able to see the results. Again, now I can come in and I can choose all of the users that I want to give these permissions to. Just be aware that DocuWare are hierarchical permissions. So even though I've set myself up here to just this search role, because I've also set myself up somewhere else with store roles, these roles combine together to give me both sets of roles. So it's not, oh, I've set him up for this, he can't do that, or I've set her up for this and she can't do that. It will always give users a kind of a grouping of all the roles that you give them within the system. Once you're happy, click Save, save those permissions, and your permissions are now set up. What we've now just created is a HR cabinet with a dedicated search, a dedicated store, a dedicated result, and 2 different sets of permissions within the system, really simply and really quickly. Please do feel free to reach out if you have any questions on what I've created. I'd be more than happy to have a conversation, more than happy to show you through or talk through what you're looking at doing and seeing if there's anything else we can do to assist. What I'll also do in future videos is I'll also show how now to create a search dialog or a select list to make things filtered. So we're not showing any, we're not allowing any random entries. We're forcing users to enter things that we want them to enter. I'll also show how we can then create filtered lists and also how we can create what's called a field mask, which is, for example, if we want a user to enter an email address, they must enter an email address in a set format. We'll have those videos coming up in the future. But for now, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you found some benefit in the video. Please do like, please do subscribe to the channel. It really, really helps. And add any comments that you've got. Thanks so much for watching. Cheers, bye.